there. All statistics can fall within what they call a bell curve. I think pretty much everybody agrees. Everybody knows what a bell curve is, so it looks like this. Okay, so if we looked at wealth moves, it takes 97 to 98% of all wealth within 4 generations, so it starts here, and by the time it comes out here, we're 4th generation, the bulk of everybody falls into within that statistic. But you have your outliers that come out here. You have your positive and your negative deviance. You have different things that come into play into that particular graph. But let's look for a second at the cycles of wealth, at the stages of wealth and what happens. And I break them down into 5 or 6 different classes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's talk about first cycle. One is called, the first cycle of wealth I call basically cruising. Okay? And so we put the cruisers down here. We don't even let them get onto the... They're not even allowed to get onto the stages of wealth. But cruisers, you know, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. But cruisers are really in that category. A lot of them end up being complainers. They end up living their life, and they can find everything that goes wrong. But I remember growing up. Do you remember growing up? Did anybody ever cruise Maine growing up? I guess it depends on the city that you lived in. You know, but you get it. What are you going to go to do tonight? Well, we're going to go cruise Maine. There's another word than cruise. What is it? Drag Maine. We're going to go drag State Street. We're going to go drag State. Wherever it is, we're going to go drag. And when in our city, and in other people that I've talked to, we had a place that we always started at. No matter what, this is where it started, and no matter what, this is where it ended. So ours was the Dairy Queen here and Safeway here. All right, and that's where we went. We would started the Dairy Queen, we'd cruise Maine, looking at the girls and trying to find them. Get to Safeway, take a real slow turnaround, maybe park for a little bit, look and see what's going on. Come back onto Maine, come back down to the Dairy Queen. That's Friday night, okay? Yeah, exactly. So, you know, that's cruisers. That's the way they live their life. They get up in the morning. That's kind of neon-y, or what do you call that? Anyway, kind of, sort of. Anyway, so they get up in the morning. I mean, they get up in the morning. They do the same routine every day. They go to work. They get done from work. They come back home, do the same thing when they get home. Their favorite TV show's on. They kick their feet up. They get done. They go to bed. They get up the next morning. They do the exact same thing, and they do this all day long. They might read the paper, they might complain about something, they might say something's going on, but they're okay with that. And we have lots of cruisers, and we're okay with the cruisers. That's an okay thing. They got to be comfortable with themselves, and that's great. But that's an area that they don't jump up onto the stages of wealth because they're just cruising. They're just cruising. But then there's those that say, hey, I really want to go beyond the Dairy Queen. I want to go beyond the Safeway. And those are what we call strivers. And so they start to go beyond the city limits, and they start to then extend this archway of wealth. And as the strivers go up and they start looking at this kind of a thing, some of them we have perpetual strivers. And the perpetual strivers are those that are always looking for a quick way to make something happen. And there's always got to be a better way. So they'll start one, and then they're permanent strivers, you know, and then they'll go, oh, well, what's this over here? Well, I can get rich faster over here. And they'll move over here. And then they'll move over there. And then they move back and forth. And so you have these kind of perpetual strivers that here. But all of a sudden along the way, then you'll have them come along and they'll say, all right, I've now got something that I like, and I'm now starting to ascend. I'm now an ascender. I'm going up the pathway. I'm now starting to say, wow, this is really cool. And pretty soon, I mean, how many of you in this room have ever said to your spouse and said, you know, if we just made X, we don't have to be rich. You know, that would take care of our bills. We'd be on top of things. We'd be just fine. Anybody ever said that? You know, and then what happened when you got to X?
Spent what?
Yeah, yeah. That's the marvelous thing about the human mind, is that the human mind will always look out to the horizon. And where's the horizon? Where is the horizon?
Out there.
Can you get to it?
No.
Can you sneak up on it? Go there and wait for the sun to come up? Or go down, or whatever it's going to do there? You can't get to it, so the brain works that way. It's a wonderful blessing. It really is. You can't get to the horizon. So as I move to that level of saying if we only made X, guess what? The horizon's moved. If we got to X on everything that we did, it's like the astronauts when they went to the moon and came back, they technically were in clinical depression because they didn't have a new horizon. And so that's a real blessing that we have, is that ability to have that bigger future and always have that horizon in front of us. So ascenders, as they continue to move, this continues to move up. So the enemy of ascending, okay, the enemy of ascending, I need 2 more hands. The enemy of ascending is arriving. Arriving. That's the enemy of ascending. Because when you've arrived, you've gotten on the moon. Where are you going to go from there? You've arrived. This is a very important concept. This is a very important concept because this concept of arrival is a real negative. Think about it. How many lottery winners, how long does it take for them to lose their money? A couple of years. The average kid that inherits, the average next generation that inherits money, they just came out with a study that, you know how long it takes for them to buy their first car? After they've gotten their inheritance? 19 days. 19 days is the average across the board of everybody that they surveyed. 19 days before they bought a brand new car. So, but what happens to that wealth? What happens to these lottery winners? They've arrived. And when you arrive, an amazing thing happens, you see, because then you put your arms around what you've got. These poor kids that arrive on third base and think they hit a triple, they don't know how they got it, so they put their arms around it. They don't know what to do with it. Some of them rebel, so they become more philanthropic, supposedly philanthropic, more wasteful, really, because of the way that they're doing it. But they think they're philanthropic because they're rebelling against their parents. They don't know how to react to it. But they're putting their arms around their wealth because they don't know how to create wealth. And so if they don't know how to create wealth, the only thing they can do then is to try and put their arms around it. But what happens when you put your arms around something? When you put your arms around something, you can no longer use it, really. The thing is, when you put your arms around it, you can't give. And when you can't give, if your arms are open, guess what? You can't receive. So if you're not a creator, if you're not able to put out here like this as a creating, you guess what? You can't receive either. And so what happens when you hit that state of arriving, then you start to descend. And that's how the cycle goes. A diver. Exactly. So you got strivers, drivers, arrivers, and divers, if you want to. Okay. But now you start descending, so you're a diver. And so you look at that and you say, wow, what can we do? So is this a concept? Well, this is a proven concept. This is a proven concept. We know this happens over and over and over again. So we have to figure out, how do we break this pattern? And over here, you see what happens is this crazy thing creeps up, and this crazy thing called entitlement. And this crazy thing called entitlement, I call it the reservoir of entitlement. And the reservoir of entitlement is something that's out there that says, I'm entitled now. I've arrived, so I've entitled. Is that just something that's with the affluent, by the way? Do we have people that are below poverty that feel entitled? They've got 3 generations of wealth. They've had a rich uncle that's taking care of them. And the definition of false happiness, by the way, well, let me just put it this way. False happiness is based upon comparisons. False happiness is based upon comparisons. What's the name of the running back that just got signed with Adrian? No, what's his name? That just signed the big contract with Houston. Is there a football fan in here? Foster. Adrian Foster. Did anybody see the interview with him? It's priceless. Because this is a kid that grew up, that watched his mother go in and hawk her wedding ring so that she could buy food for her kids. And he talked about how he dealt with that and how he would look at things, and somebody said to him, because he only made $500,000 last year, $540,000. But yet he was the 3rd or 4th leading running back in the whole league. He just signed a contract for $46 million. That's $45.5 million more than he made last year. And they said, did that bother you when you compared to everybody else that's out there doing this? He says, not 1 second. Not one bit. The only person I compare against is myself. I was pretty dang happy. You know, I was pretty happy. I just say, what do I need to do this year that's just going to move me along? We'll talk about motion theory before we get to the end of the day, but he did not have that that attitude of entitlement. Yes, Scott?
On that entitlement issue, there was another article in the news today about a lady from Detroit who won the lottery. She was on food stamps.
Oh, I read that.
She stayed on food stamps. She won $1 million. She kept taking the hand off.
Yeah, they're trying to change the law in that state now. Because they said it happened once before, too, that it doesn't count as income. So they had to keep giving her food stamps. So that spirit of entitlement over here. Over here you have the rivers of empowerment. So you really think about it. These are the clubs and the trophies. This is the wisdom and the course knowledge. And so when you talk about this, what you're really creating here are rivers. Rivers of wealth. And when you talk about the rivers, what does that spell? Thrivers. And that's what we're talking about. How do we become thrivers? And thrivers are those that you work with, those are those in your family, those are you. If you decide, do I want to be the person that's over here creating this false sense of false happiness by comparing what I'm doing with everybody else, or do I want to go over here and actually create rivers of wealth? And the rivers of wealth then are making a difference in the world. I can control the flow. Plus I can create new lives. Rivers create. Reservoirs absorb. That's all they do. They just absorb. They absorb the sun, which depletes the water. They absorb it in the ground. They absorb. Rivers create.